Hello and welcome to Scoreless at the Break, a six-part original audio series that tells the story of the schism between Fatah and Hamas through the lens of the Palestine national football team. My name is Basil McDaddy, an independent journalist that has covered the Palestine national football team for 2 decades. After listening to this podcast, you should get a better sense of what Palestine was like between 2005 and 2011, while also gaining unique insight into how football continues to flourish in a nation that has been occupied for 8 decades. If you like what you hear, you can support my work by subscribing to footballpalestine.com. Paid subscribers get exclusive access to the full six-part series. And now, onto the show.
Episode 1: Optimism After Death. There's something almost paradoxical about optimism in the face of death. But perhaps it's a sign of the unwavering Palestinian spirit that in November 2004, a majority of Palestinians, 60% according to one poll, were actually optimistic after the passing of Yasser Arafat. Arafat remained a popular figure. Thousands attended his funeral in Ramallah. But there had also been frustration with the status quo. Corruption had run rampant under his watch, and the promise of the Oslo Accords had never materialized. Now that he was gone, dying in somewhat sudden and mysterious circumstances, there was an opportunity to start anew. That optimism extended to the national football team, and on the surface it seemed misplaced. In 44 official matches since Palestine was admitted into FIFA in 1998, they had registered only 6 wins, 14 draws, and 25 losses. But here's the thing, almost half of those losses came by a single goal. Maybe that's why fans remained hopeful, or maybe they were still riding the euphoria of simply having a national team at all. What's undeniable is that Palestine had become a respectable footballing outfit. In 2 qualification attempts each for the Asian Cup and World Cup, they had acquitted themselves well. The hope was that once the political situation improved, the national team could build on those achievements and maybe, just maybe, qualify for the Asian Cup. It didn't seem far-fetched. After all, Palestine had started World Cup qualification for Germany 2006 by thrashing Chinese Taipei 8-0 and earning a 1-1 draw against Iraq. But with the benefit of hindsight, there were mirages everywhere. Illusions that fooled Palestinian society into thinking better days were just around the corner. The first mirage came in the 1990s, when a degree of self-rule was granted and tens of thousands of Palestinians in exile returned, if not to their original cities, towns, and villages, then to their homeland at the very least. The second mirage was this period right here, this misplaced optimism after Arafat's death. What actually transpired in the mid-2000s would make things worse for both the nation and the team. The breakdown in final settlement negotiations and the outbreak of the Second Intifada had dimmed the hopes of many. But the political project of the 1990s was still seen as plausible. Maybe that had something to do with increased representation on the world stage. After all, less than a generation ago, Golda Meir and her acolytes were pushing the idea that Palestinians didn't exist, that they were interlopers in their own land. The early 2000s were tough, but several events in the cultural zeitgeist gave hope and put to rest that false narrative Israel had been pushing for nearly 50 years. In 2002, the film Divine Intervention won the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival. 3 years later, Paradise Now was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. Palestine's success in international football was part of this landscape too. For Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, the hope was that if the peace process could get back on track, maybe a better future could finally arrive. To understand why they felt that way, you need to understand what Palestine, specifically the West Bank and Gaza, was like in the immediate aftermath of the Second Intifada. There was a concerted effort by the United States to prop up the party of Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, also known by his kunya, Abu Mazen. He had succeeded Yasser Arafat following a presidential election in January 2005, capturing 2/3 of the vote. The election was marred by Israeli obstruction. Candidates couldn't campaign freely, and in some cases, Palestinians couldn't vote at all. Palestinians in the diaspora were excluded entirely. This election took place in the aftermath of the US invasion of Iraq. Ideologues in Washington were keen to bring democracy to the region, convinced that free elections would bring free markets and create societies aligned with American interests. Abu Mazen's rise to power was used as evidence to support that hypothesis. A little over a month after his election, the Israeli Knesset approved plans for a unilateral disengagement from Gaza. Although never realized, the initial plan also called for Palestinians to open a seaport and reconstruct the airport Israel had destroyed in December 2001. There were proposals for Palestinian control over bus entry and exit to and from the West Bank. None of this came to pass. Instead, Israel agreed that Egypt would control the Egyptian side of the border while Israel continued to provide water, communication and electricity, and regulate the passage of goods. The Palestinian Authority marketed it as a first step toward liberation. Today Gaza, tomorrow the West Bank and Jerusalem was the slogan pushed onto a genuinely optimistic public. The reality was far more sobering. Human Rights Watch argued that even without a ground presence, Israel still had the legal obligations of an occupying power due to the Palestinian Authority's lack of sovereign control. Despite this, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon won political capital in the West by making this unpopular decision. But it wasn't made with any goodwill toward Palestinians. The reality was that it had become too expensive to defend 8,000 settlers living amongst 1.4 million Palestinians in Gaza. Deputy Prime Minister Shimon Peres admitted that Israel was disengaging from Gaza because of demography. It made more sense to move those settlers to the less densely populated West Bank and create demographic realities that would result in less land ceded to Palestinians in any future peace settlement. Not that Sharon was keen on reinvigorating the peace process. His advisor, Dov Weissglass, likened the strategic disengagement to formaldehyde for any political negotiations toward an independent Palestinian state. It also served to protect Israel from increasing calls to adopt a one-man, one-vote policy, which would effectively end Israel's existence as a Jewish ethno-state. In an interview with Haaretz, Weissglass laid out Sharon's strategy plainly. The significance of the disengagement plan is the freezing of the peace process, and when you freeze that process, you prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, and you prevent a discussion on the refugees, the borders and Jerusalem, all with a presidential blessing and the ratification of both houses of Congress. That is exactly what happened. Everything was going to plan for the neoconservatives in Washington. The Second Intifada had ended with Sharon and Abu Mazen agreeing to cease hostilities, with Israel withdrawing from cities in the West Bank. Part of this agreement saw the United States appoint retired General Keith Dayton to create a security force for the Palestinian Authority. To the public, this was presented as a way to boost safety and end the chaos of the Second Intifada by putting weapons solely in the hands of a centralized fighting force. All that was left was to get a democratic rubber stamp on the project. Legislative elections were slated for 2006. But this time, Hamas decided to participate, and that would change the political landscape for years to come. Palestine's football team was also eager to turn the page. Valiant efforts in 2006 World Cup qualification had been hampered by the lack of league play in the West Bank and Gaza. This meant an over-reliance on the diaspora and a chronic shortage of match-fit players. A respectable campaign ended in November 2004 with 7 points from a group featuring Chinese Taipei, Iraq and Uzbekistan. The same point total as their 2002 campaign, but against considerably tougher opponents. To lead them in the new cycle, Palestine turned to a familiar face. Azmi Nassar. He signed a 2-year contract in January 2005, tasked with unearthing new talents. It was a coup for the national team. Nassar had just led Akhar Nazareth to promotion to the Israeli top flight, becoming only the second Arab team to play in the Israeli Premier League. The Nazarene got to work immediately, crisscrossing the country in search of a new crop of players. In his first stint with the team, he had handed debuts to 19 players over 10 games between August 1999 and April 2000. The first games of his second tenure were scheduled for 11 months later. A pair of losses against Saudi Arabia and Iraq at the 2005 West Asian Games in December were largely forgettable, except for the new players drafted into the side. Gaza's factory line of talent produced 2 more gems. Ibrahim al-Swerki, a nimble midfielder who could dribble in tight spaces, and Ismail Amour, a tricky winger with speed who loved tormenting fullbacks. But the big surprise was the youngest and rawest of the group, a stocky boy with blonde hair who bulldozed defences en route to goal. Fahed Atal was 19 and completely anonymous. There was nothing resembling a professional league in the West Bank, and Kalkilia was more known for its fruit than its football. A national team call-up was a surprise, but Nassar trusted his gut. In the first weeks of 2006, everything changed in Palestine, on a social, political, and footballing level. 4 days into the new year, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon suffered a stroke and went into a coma. 1 day later, Azmi Nassar was diagnosed with brain cancer. At the end of the month, Hamas would produce a shock electoral win. The tumor in Azmi Nassar's brain became evident on January 5, 2006, following a morning training session with the national team in Gaza. He couldn't remember who he was, where he was, or much else about his life. Training that morning had been extremely difficult. He couldn't remember a single name of any of his players. When he went back to his residence, his memory was no clearer. He began to find it difficult to remember his own name. Several workers were in the house installing faucets. They greeted him as captain, but no one mentioned his name. In a fit of frustration, he threw them out. Embarrassed, he decided to lie down. And then he prayed. "I spoke to God and asked him to help me pronounce my name," Azmi recounted later. "I got nervous and came to the conclusion that I needed to get to my family. I suddenly realized that I had a wife and a child, but I couldn't remember their names. Something happened to me. I must have lost my memory. It took me an hour and a half to find your number in my phone." Ruthie, his wife, tried to calm him down. He had been unable to find her in his contacts because her name was saved as Al-Malak, the angel, but he managed to find his home phone number and reach her on the landline. She calmly explained, "You are Azmi Nassar. You are a football coach, the coach of the Palestinian national team. I am your wife, Ruthie. We have a son, Ramon, and a daughter, Julie, and your mother, who lives with us in Nazareth." Ruthie got on the phone to a friend of Azmi's, Ismail Matar, a member of the PFA's board. Matar immediately made his way to Gaza, and upon being told that Azmi's life was in danger, he brought his pistol. The couple stayed on the phone until Matar arrived with a group of men. Upon reaching the residence, Matar broke the door down and approached with his pistol drawn. "Calm down, Azmi. This is your friend," Ruthie reassured her husband over the phone. "If he is my friend, then why does he have a gun?" Azmi barked back. It was a pertinent question, one that showed Nassar was still cognizant despite his confusion. After a couple of minutes, Azmi was able to recognize some of the men with Matar, but not the man he had hosted at Christmas dinner just a few weeks ago, the man who had been instrumental in bringing him back to the national team. Ismail's eyes started to well up when he realized how serious his friend's condition was. A few hours later, Ruthie and their son Ramon crossed into Gaza to check on Azmi. When they entered the hospital room, it was evident something was desperately wrong. The left side of Azmi's face was horribly contorted. He wasn't sure who these two people were, but one thing he was sure of: he would not abandon his team. Upon reaching the Erez crossing, he had to be physically restrained. The coach wanted to be with his team, his players. If he left Gaza, who could assure him he would ever see them again? In the end, he was convinced to go to a nearby hospital. Azmi suggested Ashkelon, and he was driven to the Barzilai Medical Center, a 15-minute drive from the checkpoint. Despite its proximity, it might as well have been another planet. Azmi, wearing his Palestine training gear, was greeted with incredulous stares from staff and fellow patients. "Let them go to hell, that's the way it is," Azmi told Ruthie in a reassuring but confrontational tone. Azmi Nassar was immediately sent for a CT scan. What the doctors found would change his life forever and force him to make an impossible choice between his health and his team. Next time on the show, surgery, recovery, and a coach who refused to let cancer keep him off the touchline. Scoreless at the Break is a production of Football Palestine. Researched, written, and narrated by Basil McDaddy. If you liked this episode, consider sharing it with a friend. You can support independent Palestinian journalism by subscribing to Football Palestine at footballpalestine.com. Paid subscribers get access to all 6 episodes,